Millionaire's daughter and Latina maid's son fall in love. Family's response shocks entire neighborhood. Hello? Welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy the story. She wasn't supposed to hear it. Standing behind the heavy wooden door of her father's office, Emily's heart raced as she caught fragments of a conversation not meant for her ears. The tension in the room was thick, the voices low but unmistakable. Her father's commanding tone and the trembling voice of the woman who had raised her like her own daughter. "I'll pay you whatever it takes. But this has to end." Those words hit Emily like a storm, shattering her world in an instant. What could be so important, so dangerous that her father would offer money to make it disappear? A secret so dark that it was being discussed in hushed tones between her father and their longtime maid, Maria. Emily's stomach twisted as her mind raced through the possibilities. Was it about her? Miguel? It couldn't be. Could it? A cold fear began to spread through her chest as she realized there was only one way to find out. With a shaky breath, she stepped forward, knowing that once she crossed the threshold, there would be no turning back. What Emily was about to uncover would change everything she thought she knew about her family, her love, and the secrets that had been buried for far too long. The Harrison mansion stood like a gleaming fortress on Mulholland Drive, its pristine white walls and manicured gardens a testament to wealth and privilege. But on this sweltering Los Angeles afternoon, the air inside was thick with tension, punctuated by muffled sobs and raised voices. Emily Harrison, the 22-year-old daughter of tech mogul Richard Harrison, pressed her ear against the heavy oak door of her father's study. Her heart raced as she strained to catch every word of the heated exchange within. "Please, Mr. Harrison," a woman's voice pleaded, thick with emotion and a hint of a Spanish accent. "I beg you, don't do this to my son. Miguel has done nothing wrong." Emily's stomach clenched. She recognized the voice of Maria Sanchez, their longtime housekeeper and one of the kindest souls she'd ever known. But she'd never heard Maria sound so desperate, so broken. "Nothing wrong?" Richard Harrison's voice boomed, dripping with disdain. "He's corrupting my daughter, filling her head with ridiculous notions. I won't stand for it, Maria. Not in my house, not in my family." A chair scraped against hardwood, followed by the sound of pacing footsteps. Emily held her breath, pressing closer to the door. "I'm offering you a way out," her father continued, his tone softening to something almost reasonable, if not for the underlying steel. "A generous sum, enough for you and Miguel to start fresh somewhere else, far away from here, from Emily." Emily's vision blurred with tears. Miguel. Her Miguel. The boy with the warm brown eyes and gentle smile who had stolen her heart over long summer days and secret moonlit rendezvous. The son of their housekeeper, yes, but so much more than that. Brilliant, kind, with dreams as big as the California sky. "Mr. Harrison, please," Maria's voice cracked. "Miguel and Emily, they love each other. You can't just—" "Love?" Richard scoffed. "What do they know of love? Emily has a future, a legacy to uphold. I won't let her throw it all away on some gardener's son." The slur hit Emily like a physical blow. She bit back a gasp, anger rising to mix with her fear and heartbreak. "You don't know him," Maria shot back, a hint of fire breaking through her despair. "Miguel is smart, hardworking. He's going to make something of himself, with or without your money." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Richard growled. "I have connections, Maria. One phone call and your boy's scholarship disappears. His internship, gone. I can make sure he never works in this town again." The threat hung in the air, suffocating in its cruelty. Emily's legs trembled, her mind reeling. How could her father, the man who had taught her about integrity and fairness, be capable of such malice? You wouldn't," Maria whispered, horror evident in her voice. "Try me," Richard replied coldly. "Take the money, Maria, for Miguel's sake. Make him understand that this, whatever it is with Emily, it ends now. Or I promise you, you'll both regret it." Something in Emily snapped. Before she could think better of it, she burst through the door, startling both occupants of the study. "How dare you!" she cried, fixing her father with a glare of betrayal and fury. "You can't do this." Richard's face paled, then flushed with anger. Emily, this doesn't concern you. Go to your room." "The hell it doesn't," Emily shouted, years of practiced decorum shattering in the face of raw emotion. "You're trying to destroy Miguel's life, all because you can't stand the idea of your precious daughter loving someone you deem beneath her." She turned to Maria, who stood frozen, tear tracks staining her cheeks. "Maria, I'm so sorry. You don't have to do this. We'll figure something out, I promise." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. "That's enough. Emily, you don't understand what's at stake here. This isn't some fairy tale romance. There are consequences, realities you can't even begin to—" "Oh, I understand perfectly." Emily cut him off, her voice ice cold. "I understand that you're a bigot and a bully, that you'd rather destroy an innocent person's future than see your daughter happy with someone who doesn't fit your narrow worldview." Maria stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "Miss Emily, please. You shouldn't fight with your father because of us. Miguel and I will be okay." But Emily could see the fear in Maria's eyes, the slump of defeat in her shoulders. This woman, who had been more of a mother to her than her own ever was, now brought low by her father's cruelty. "No," Emily said firmly. "This isn't right. None of this is right." She squared her shoulders, meeting her father's gaze. "If you go through with this, if you hurt Miguel or Maria in any way, I swear I'll never forgive you. I'll walk out that door and never look back." Richard's face contorted with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You ungrateful little—" he sputtered. "After everything I've done for you, you'd throw it all away for some fling?" "It's not a fling," Emily cried, frustrated tears spilling down her cheeks. "I love him, Dad. Miguel is kind and brilliant, and he sees me for who I am, not just as Richard Harrison's daughter. Why can't you understand that?" The room fell silent, the weight of Emily's declaration hanging in the air. Richard stared at his daughter, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Emily dared to hope she'd gotten through to him. Then Maria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to know, Miss Emily. Something I should have told you, told everyone a long time ago." Both Emily and Richard turned to look at the housekeeper. Maria's hands trembled, but her gaze was steady, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "What is it, Maria?" Emily asked gently. Maria took a deep breath. "It's about your father, about his past, about why he's really so against you and Miguel being together." Richard's face drained of all color. "Maria, don't, please." But Maria shook her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, but I can't let you destroy my son's life to keep your secrets. It's time the truth came out." As Maria began to speak, Emily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. With each word, the carefully constructed reality of her life crumbled, revealing a truth so shocking, so fundamentally world-altering, that she could barely breathe. The secret Maria revealed that day would change everything, not just for Emily and Miguel, but for both families, and ultimately, for the entire exclusive neighborhood they called home. It was a truth that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and forgiveness, leaving no one untouched in its wake. As the last words fell from Maria's lips, Emily staggered back, her mind reeling. She looked at her father, this man she thought she knew, and saw a stranger. The implications of what she'd just learned crashed over her like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep away everything she'd ever believed about herself, her family, and the world she lived in. In that moment, standing in her father's opulent study with the Los Angeles sun streaming through the windows, Emily Harrison's life changed forever. And somewhere across town, blissfully unaware of the storm about to engulf him, Miguel Sanchez went about his day, not knowing that the course of his future had just been irrevocably altered. The stage was set, the secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the pristine streets of Bel Air, but Emily Harrison felt cold to her core. She sat on a secluded bench in the sprawling gardens of her family's estate, her mind still reeling from the bombshell Maria had dropped just hours ago. The manicured lawns and meticulously pruned rose bushes seemed to mock her with their perfection, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. Her phone buzzed for the umpteenth time. Miguel's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a candid photo of him laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Emily's heart clenched. How could she even begin to explain what had happened? How could she burden him with the weight of a secret that threatened to crush her very existence? With trembling fingers, she finally answered. "Miguel," she breathed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Emily, thank God," Miguel's voice came through, tinged with worry. "I've been trying to reach you all day. What's going on? My mom came home crying, but she won't tell me anything. Did your father do something?" Emily closed her eyes, the memory of her father's face, contorted with a mixture of rage and fear, flashing through her mind. "It's complicated," she managed. "Can you meet me? At our spot in Griffith Park? I need to see you." An hour later, Emily found herself wrapped in Miguel's arms, the familiar scent of his cologne mingling with the earthy aroma of the eucalyptus trees surrounding them. For a moment, she allowed herself to pretend that nothing had changed, that they were just two young lovers stealing a moment away from the world. But reality crashed back as Miguel pulled away, his warm brown eyes searching her face. "Em, you're scaring me. What happened?" Taking a deep breath, Emily began to recount the confrontation in her father's study. With each word, she watched Miguel's expression shift from concern to anger to disbelief. "He tried to bribe my mom? To keep us apart?" Miguel's voice shook with barely contained fury. "Who does he think he is?" "That's not even the worst part," Emily whispered, her heart pounding. She steeled herself, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything between them. "Miguel, there's something you need to know. Something about our families, about why my father is so against us being together." As Emily revealed the secret Maria had disclosed, she watched the color drain from Miguel's face. His hands, always so steady and sure, began to tremble. "No," he muttered, shaking his head in denial. "No, that can't be true. My mom would have told me. She wouldn't have kept something like that from me for all these years." Emily reached for him, but Miguel flinched away, stumbling to his feet. I need to think, to talk to my mom. This can't be real." "Miguel, please," Emily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I know it's a lot to take in, but we can figure this out together. I love you." Miguel's eyes, usually so warm and full of affection, now looked at her with a mix of confusion and something that made Emily's blood run cold. Doubt. "I love you too, Em," he said softly. "But this changes everything. I don't even know who I am anymore." As Miguel turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering twilight, Emily felt as though her heart was being torn from her chest. She collapsed onto the ground, sobs racking her body, the weight of secrets and lies threatening to suffocate her. Across town, in a modest apartment in Echo Park, Maria Sanchez sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of cold tea clutched in her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her shoulders slumped with the burden of years of silence finally broken. The sound of a key in the lock made her straighten, hastily wiping at her eyes. Miguel burst through the door, his face a storm of emotions. "Mijo," Maria started, but the look in her son's eyes stopped her cold. "Is it true?" Miguel demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "What Emily told me, about our family, about Mr. Harrison. Is it true, Mama?" Maria's silence was all the confirmation he needed. Miguel slumped against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the worn linoleum floor. "Why?" he choked out. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maria moved to kneel beside her son, reaching out to cup his face in her weathered hands. "Oh, my sweet boy. I wanted to protect you, to give you a chance at a life unburdened by the mistakes of the past." As Maria began to fill in the gaps of the story, explaining the complex web of relationships and long-buried secrets that tied their family to the Harrisons, Miguel felt his world shift on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about his place in the world, was suddenly cast into doubt. The future he had dreamed of with Emily now seemed tainted, complicated by revelations he could never have imagined. Back in Bel Air, Richard Harrison paced the floor of his study like a caged animal. The carefully constructed facade of his life was crumbling around him, and for the first time in decades, he felt truly afraid. He picked up his phone, fingers hovering over a contact he had sworn never to use again. But desperate times called for desperate measures. As the line connected, Richard's voice was low and urgent. "It's me. We have a problem, the past, and it's coming back to haunt us. I need your help to make this go away, whatever it takes." As night fell over Los Angeles, 4 lives hung in the balance. Emily and Miguel, torn between love and the shock of newfound truths. Maria, grappling with the consequences of her long-kept secret. And Richard, willing to go to any lengths to preserve his power and reputation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would rock the foundations of 2 families and leave no one unscathed. In the city where dreams are made and broken every day, a story of love, betrayal, and long-buried secrets was about to unfold, with consequences that would echo through generations. The burden of decisions made long ago now rested squarely on the shoulders of the young, leaving Emily and Miguel to grapple with a legacy they never asked for and a love that might not survive the weight of the truth. The following week unfolded like a waking nightmare for Emily Harrison. The sprawling mansion she once called home now felt like a gilded cage, every luxury a mocking reminder of the lies that had built her family's fortune. She moved through the halls like a ghost, avoiding her father's searching gaze and the pitying looks from the house staff who had overheard snippets of that fateful confrontation. But it was the silence from Miguel that cut the deepest. Her calls went unanswered, her texts unread. The void where his warmth and laughter used to be was a constant, gnawing ache in her chest on a particularly stifling afternoon. Emily found herself in the kitchen, absently stirring a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. The sound of hushed voices from the adjacent room caught her attention. "Can't let this get out, Richard." The clipped tones of her mother, Victoria Harrison, drifted through the air. "Think of the scandal, the damage to the company. Don't you think I know that?" Her father's voice was strained, barely containing his frustration. "I'm handling it." Emily inched closer to the door, her heart racing. "Handling it how?" Victoria pressed. "That boy Miguel, he knows too much now. He's a liability." There was a pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice had taken on a chilling calm. "I've made some calls. Called in some favors. By this time next week, Miguel Sanchez will be nothing but a distant memory." The teacup slipped from Emily's grasp, shattering on the marble floor. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. What had her father done? Across town in a rundown community center in East Los Angeles, Miguel Sanchez sat in a cramped office, his future crumbling before his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sanchez, but there seems to have been an error with your scholarship application." The administrator's voice was sympathetic but firm. "According to our records, you failed to meet several key requirements. I'm afraid we'll have to rescind our offer." Miguel felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. "That's impossible," he protested weakly. "I triple-checked everything. My grades, my community service hours. It was all there." The administrator shrugged helplessly. "I can only go by what's in the system, and right now the system is telling me you're no longer eligible. I'm truly sorry." As Miguel stumbled out into the blistering heat of the parking lot, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his internship coordinator at a prestigious tech firm, the stepping stone he had been counting on to launch his career. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, we regret to inform you that your internship offer has been rescinded. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." The words blurred as tears filled Miguel's eyes. In the span of a week, everything he had worked so hard for was slipping through his fingers like sand. His mother's words from years ago echoed in his mind. "In this country, mijo, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far." He had believed that with enough determination, enough sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends, he could overcome any obstacle. But now, faced with the crushing weight of a system that seemed rigged against him, Miguel felt a spark of something he had never allowed himself to feel before: despair. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Emily found herself standing outside the modest apartment complex where Miguel lived. Her hands shook as she raised them to knock, unsure of the reception she would receive. The door creaked open, revealing Maria's tired face. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Miss Emily," she breathed. "You shouldn't be here." "Please," Emily pleaded, "I need to see Miguel to warn him." Maria's expression softened with concern. "Warn him? About what?" Before Emily could respond, heavy footsteps approached from behind. She turned to see 2 men in dark suits, their expressions grim. "Emily Harrison? one of them asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Your father sent us to bring you home now." Emily's heart raced. She turned back to Maria, her voice urgent. "Tell Miguel to be careful. My father, he's trying to—" A firm hand gripped her arm, cutting off her words. As the men led her away, Emily caught one last glimpse of Maria's frightened face before the door closed. In a sleek high-rise office downtown, Richard Harrison ended a phone call, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Everything was falling into place. The scholarship, the internship, all taken care of with a few well-placed calls. Soon that Sanchez boy would learn his place and Emily would come to her senses. But as he swiveled in his chair to gaze out at the Los Angeles skyline, a flicker of doubt crossed Richard's face. The lengths he was going to, the lines he was crossing, was it really worth it? The image of Emily's betrayed expression flashed through his mind, quickly followed by memories long buried of another young woman whose dreams he had crushed so many years ago. He shook his head, banishing the thoughts. No, he had come too far, sacrificed too much to let it all crumble now. He would protect his legacy, his family's name, no matter the cost. As night fell over the city of angels, 4 souls wrestled with the consequences of secrets and lies. Emily, trapped between loyalty to her family and her love for Miguel. Miguel, facing a future suddenly devoid of the opportunities he had worked so hard to earn. Maria, torn between protecting her son and revealing the full truth that could destroy them all. And Richard, so focused on maintaining his grip on power that he couldn't see the damage he was inflicting on those he claimed to love. The stakes were rising, the tension building to a breaking point. In the days to come, long-buried truths would claw their way to the surface, forcing each of them to confront the person they truly were and the person they wanted to be. As a cool breeze swept through the palm-lined streets, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine and shattered dreams, the city of angels held its breath, waiting for the storm that was surely coming. The annual Harrison Foundation Gala was the social event of the season in Los Angeles. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, the who's who of Hollywood and Silicon Valley began to arrive at the Harrison Mansion. Sleek limousines and exotic sports cars lined the winding driveway, disgorging a parade of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Emily Harrison stood before her full-length mirror, barely recognizing the young woman staring back at her. The emerald green gown hugged her figure, its shimmer a stark contrast to the dullness in her eyes. 2 weeks had passed since she'd last seen Miguel. 2 weeks of unanswered calls and a gnawing fear in the pit of her stomach. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Emily?" Maria's voice called softly. "Your father is asking for you downstairs." Emily's heart clenched. She opened the door to find Maria dressed in her usual housekeeper's uniform, her eyes filled with worry. "Have you heard from Miguel?" Emily whispered urgently. Maria shook her head, her voice barely audible. "No, mija, he won't answer my calls either. I'm scared, Emily. This isn't like him." Emily reached out, squeezing Maria's hand. "We'll find him, I promise, but first I need to end this charade once and for all." As Emily descended the grand staircase, a hush fell over the gathered guests. Richard Harrison stepped forward, a practiced smile on his face as he took his daughter's arm. "There's my girl," he announced, his voice carrying across the foyer. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the future of Harrison Tech, my daughter Emily." Polite applause filled the air, but Emily barely heard it. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar face, hoping against hope that Miguel had somehow found a way to be here. The next hour passed in a blur of fake smiles and mindless small talk. Emily nodded and laughed at all the right moments, all while her mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. Just as she thought she couldn't take another moment of the facade, a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. Raised voices cut through the gentle murmur of conversation, and Emily's heart leapt into her throat as she recognized one of them. Miguel. He burst through the crowd, his usual well-groomed appearance replaced by disheveled hair and wild eyes. "Emily," he called out, desperation evident in his voice. Security guards moved to intercept him, but Emily was already pushing her way through the stunned onlookers. "Miguel, I'm here." As their eyes met across the room, the world seemed to fall away. Emily saw the pain and confusion in Miguel's gaze, mirroring her own tumultuous emotions. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard Harrison's voice boomed, cutting through the tension. He strode forward, placing himself between Emily and Miguel. "How dare you crash this event? Security, remove this person immediately." "No!" Emily cried, grabbing her father's arm. "Dad, stop this! You've done enough already!" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Victoria Harrison stepped forward, her society smile strained. "Emily, darling, perhaps we should take this somewhere private." But Emily was done with secrets and lies. Months of pent-up frustration and anger bubbled to the surface. "No, Mom. No more hiding. It's time everyone knew the truth." She turned to face the gathered guests, her voice ringing clear through the suddenly silent room. "My father, the great Richard Harrison, has been trying to destroy the life of the man I love. All because he can't stand the idea of his daughter being with someone he considers beneath us." Murmurs of shock and disapproval swept through the crowd. Richard's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Emily, that's enough. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Emily cut him off. "You canceled Miguel's scholarship, his internship. You tried to bribe his mother to send him away, all to keep your precious reputation intact." Miguel stepped forward, his eyes locked on Richard. "Is this true, Mr. Harrison? Did you really go to such lengths to keep us apart?" Before Richard could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "It's worse than that, I'm afraid." All eyes turned to see Maria standing at the edge of the crowd, still in her uniform, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Maria," Richard warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't." But Maria stood her ground, years of subservience falling away as she faced her employer. "No, Mr. Harrison, no more secrets. It's time everyone knew the truth about why you're so desperate to keep Emily and Miguel apart." The room held its collective breath as Maria began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word. 25 years ago, Richard Harrison wasn't the tech mogul you all know today. He was a young man from a wealthy family, much like Emily, and he fell in love with a girl from the wrong side of the tracks, me. Gasps and whispers erupted around the room. Emily felt as though the floor was tilting beneath her feet. Miguel reached out to steady her, his own shock evident on his face. Maria continued, her eyes never leaving Richard's increasingly pale face. "We were young and in love, but Richard's family disapproved. When I found out I was pregnant, Richard promised we'd face it together. But then—" "Enough!" Richard roared, lunging forward, but it was too late. Maria's next words fell like a bomb in the stunned silence. "Miguel isn't just the son of a maid, Emily. He's your half-brother." The room exploded into chaos. Guests gasped and shouted. Camera phones appeared from nowhere, capturing the unfolding drama. Victoria Harrison swayed on her feet, steadied by a nearby waiter. But for Emily and Miguel, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. They stared at each other, a lifetime of memories and emotions crashing over them like a tidal wave. "No," Emily whispered, her voice broken. "It can't be." Miguel's face was a mask of shock and disbelief. "All this time, you knew?" he asked, turning to his mother. Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, mijo. I thought I was protecting you." As the reality of the situation sank in, Emily felt something inside her shatter. The love she had fought so hard for, the future she had dreamed of with Miguel, all of it turned to ash in an instant. She turned to her father, who stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "How could you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to us?" Before Richard could answer, the flashes of cameras intensified. Reporters who had been covering the gala surged forward, shouting questions. The Harrison family scandal was about to become front-page news. As security guards moved to control the crowd, Emily felt a gentle touch on her arm. She looked up to see Miguel, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. "We need to get out of here," he said softly. Without a word, Emily nodded. Together they slipped away from the chaos, leaving behind the shattered remnants of their old lives and facing an uncertain future neither of them could have imagined. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the imploding gala fading behind them, Emily and Miguel exchanged a look of shared understanding. Their world had been turned upside down, but they would face whatever came next together, Yao. Not as lovers, but as family. The truth was out and nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath of the Harrison Foundation Gala exploded across Los Angeles like a shockwave. For days, it was all anyone could talk about. Tabloids plastered grainy photos of Emily and Miguel's confrontation on their covers, while more reputable news outlets dug into Richard Harrison's past, unearthing long-buried secrets and questionable business practices. Emily found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The mansion that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a prison, every corner holding memories that cut like shards of glass. She had moved into the pool house, unable to bear the suffocating tension that filled the main house. It was there, on a hazy morning a week after the gala, that Miguel found her. He stood awkwardly at the door, his usual easy confidence replaced by a hesitant vulnerability that made Emily's heart ache. "Hey," he said softly, "can we talk?" Emily nodded, gesturing for him to come in. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between them feeling both too much and not enough. "I've been doing some digging," Miguel began, his voice low and intense. "About my mom, about your dad, and about us." Emily leaned forward, her curiosity piqued despite the pain that still throbbed in her chest. "What did you find?" Miguel pulled out a worn leather journal from his backpack. "I found this in my mom's closet. It's her diary from back then." "Emily, I don't think she told us the whole truth at the gala." With trembling hands, Miguel opened the journal and began to read. As the words flowed, painting a picture of a past neither of them had known, Emily felt her world shift once again. Maria's diary spoke of a whirlwind romance with Richard, yes, but it also hinted at darker undercurrents. There were mentions of threats, of money changing hands, of a shadowy figure known only as the benefactor, who seemed to pull strings behind the scenes. "Listen to this," Miguel said, his voice tight with emotion. "R says we must end things. The benefactor won't allow it. I fear for my baby's future if I don't comply." He looked up at Emily, his eyes wide. "Emily, I think there's more to this story than just our parents' romance gone wrong." Emily's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. "The benefactor. I've heard that name before, in hushed conversations between my dad and his business partners. I always thought it was just some investor." "What if it's not?" Miguel pressed. "What if this person is the real reason behind everything that's happened?" As they pored over the diary, more questions arose than answers. Who was this mysterious benefactor? What power did they hold over Richard Harrison, one of the most influential men in Los Angeles? And most importantly, what did it mean for Emily and Miguel's true relationship? Hours passed as they pieced together fragments of a past that seemed to grow more complex by the minute. The sun had begun to set when a soft knock at the door startled them both. Maria stood in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "I thought I might find you both here," she said quietly. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have said a long time ago." As Maria settled into a chair across from them, Emily noticed how small and fragile she looked. So different from the strong, unflappable woman who had helped raise her. "What you read in that diary," Maria began, nodding towards the journal in Miguel's lap. "It's true, but it's not the whole truth." She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "The benefactor, he's the reason for everything. The reason I left Richard. The reason I've kept so many secrets." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Who is he, Maria? What does he have to do with all of this?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. He's your grandfather, Emily. Richard's father." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Emily's grandfather had died before she was born, or so she'd always been told. "But that's impossible," Emily whispered. "Dad always said his parents died in a car accident when he was young." Maria shook her head sadly. "Another lie, I'm afraid. Your grandfather is very much alive, and he's been controlling your father, and by extension all of us, for decades." As Maria began to unravel the tangled web of lies and manipulation that had shaped their lives, Emily and Miguel listened in stunned silence. The story that emerged was one of power, greed, and a family legacy built on a foundation of secrets. "But why?" Miguel asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Why go to such lengths to keep us apart?" Maria's gaze fell to the floor. Because you're not actually siblings. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Emily and Miguel exchanged a look of shock and confusion. What are you saying, Mom? Miguel pressed. Maria's next words came out in a rush as if she feared losing her courage. Miguel, Richard Harrison isn't your father. The benefactor. He made me lie, to protect the family's reputation. Your real father was a man I loved, a man who died before you were born. The revelation hung in the air, its implications slowly sinking in. Emily felt a dizzying mix of emotions, relief, confusion, anger, and underneath it all, a tiny spark of hope she dared not examine too closely. So all of this, Emily said slowly, the lies, the manipulation, trying to keep us apart, it was all for nothing? Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you both, but I see now that I only caused more pain. As the full weight of the truth settled over them, Emily and Miguel sat in stunned silence. The past they thought they knew had been built on a foundation of lies, manipulated by a man they'd never even met. But amidst the wreckage of their old lives, a new path began to emerge. They weren't siblings bound by blood but separated by circumstance. They were two people who had found each other against all odds, their love tested by forces they were only beginning to understand. Emily reached out, taking Miguel's hand in hers. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of real hope. What do we do now? Miguel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily squeezed his hand, her determination growing with each passing moment. We find the truth, she said firmly. All of it. And then we take back control of our lives. As the last light of day faded, casting long shadows across the pool house, Emily, Miguel, and Maria began to plan. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with dangers they could only imagine. But they would face it together, armed with the truth and the strength of their bond. The real battle was just beginning. The weeks following Maria's revelation were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and late-night research sessions. Emily and Miguel, their romantic relationship tentatively rekindled in light of the truth, threw themselves into unraveling the mystery of the benefactor with a fervor born of both love and righteous anger. But as they dug deeper, the stakes grew higher and the dangers more apparent. It was a crisp autumn evening when Maria burst into the pool house, her face ashen with fear. They know, she gasped, collapsing onto the couch. The benefactor's men. They approached me at the grocery store. They know we're investigating. Emily and Miguel exchanged alarmed glances. They had been so careful, or so they thought. What exactly did they say? Miguel asked, kneeling beside his mother. Maria's hands trembled as she recounted the veiled threats, the implications that harm might come not just to her, but to Miguel and Emily as well if they didn't cease their inquiries immediately. As the gravity of the situation sank in, a heavy silence fell over the room. The fight they had taken on was bigger than they had imagined, with tendrils reaching into the highest echelons of Los Angeles society and beyond. We have to stop, Emily said quietly, her heart breaking even as the words left her mouth. It's not worth risking your lives. But Miguel shook his head vehemently. No, we can't give up now. We're so close to uncovering the truth. There has to be another way. It was then that Maria straightened, a look of grim determination settling over her features. There is another way, she said softly. But the price, it may be more than any of us are willing to pay. Emily leaned forward, hope and dread warring in her chest. What do you mean? Maria took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance as if she couldn't bear to look at either of them. I could go public, tell the whole story. My relationship with Richard, the benefactor's manipulations, all of it. It would create such a scandal that they'd have no choice but to back off. But Mom, Miguel protested, that would ruin you. Your reputation, your job, you'd lose everything. A sad smile played at the corners of Maria's mouth. Perhaps, but you two would be safe. Free to live your lives, to love each other without fear or shame. The weight of Maria's proposed sacrifice hung heavy in the air. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of this woman's love, not just for her son, but for Emily as well. We can't ask you to do that, Emily said, her voice choked with emotion. You're not asking, Maria replied firmly. I'm offering, After all the lies, all the pain I've caused, maybe this is my chance to make things right. As the night wore on, they debated the pros and cons of Maria's plan. The potential fallout was staggering, not just for Maria, but for the Harrison family as well. Emily's father would likely face criminal charges, the company's stock would plummet, and the scandal would rock Los Angeles society to its core. But the alternative, living in fear, always looking over their shoulders, never knowing when the benefactor might strike, was equally unpalatable. As dawn broke over the hills, casting a pale golden light across the pool, they reached a decision. Maria would go public, but not alone. They would stand together, presenting a united front against the forces that had sought to tear them apart. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Emily reached out to trusted journalists, laying the groundwork for the story of the century. Miguel gathered every scrap of evidence they had uncovered, building an ironclad case against the benefactor and his network of influence. And Maria spent long hours in quiet reflection, steeling herself for the storm that was to come. On the morning of the press conference, Emily found Maria sitting alone in the garden, her face turned toward the rising sun. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked softly, sitting beside the woman who had become more of a mother to her than her own ever had. Maria turned, her eyes shining with unshed tears but also with a fierce determination. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. "For too long, I've lived in fear, letting others control my destiny. No more." As they made their way to the waiting car, Emily caught sight of her father watching from an upstairs window. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, Emily saw something she had never seen before in Richard Harrison's gaze. Fear. The drive to the press conference was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Miguel held Emily's hand tightly, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her skin. As they pulled up to the hotel where the conference was to be held, a sea of reporters and flashing cameras greeted them. Emily took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. This was it, the moment of truth. Maria stepped out first, her head held high despite the whispers and stares. Emily and Miguel flanked her, a united front against the world. As they made their way to the podium, Emily caught snippets of conversation from the gathered press. "Is that the Harrison girl? What's she doing with the maid? This is going to be big, I can feel it." Maria took her place at the microphone, her hands steady as she arranged her notes. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces, then turned to Emily and Miguel, a soft smile playing at her lips. "For the sake of love," she whispered so softly that only they could hear. "For the truth." And with that, Maria Sanchez began to speak, her voice clear and strong as she laid bare the secrets that had shaped their lives for so long. As the gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd, Emily felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever price they had to pay, they would face it together. The truth at last was free. The aftermath of Maria's press conference was nothing short of seismic. For days it dominated every news cycle, social media feed, and conversation across Los Angeles and beyond. The Harrison family's carefully crafted image crumbled in real time as Maria's revelations sent shockwaves through the city's elite. Emily and Miguel found themselves at the eye of the storm, hounded by paparazzi and bombarded with interview requests. They retreated to a small beach house in Malibu, seeking refuge from the media frenzy and trying to process the enormity of what had transpired. It was there, a week after the press conference, that an unexpected visitor arrived. The knock on the door came just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Miguel answered, his body tensing as he recognized the man standing on the porch. "Mr. Reeves," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "what are you doing here?" Thomas Reeves, a quiet, unassuming man who had worked as Richard Harrison's personal assistant for over 2 decades, stood nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I need to speak with you and Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's about the benefactor." Emily appeared behind Miguel, her curiosity piqued. "Come in, Mr. Reeves, please." As they settled in the living room, the tension was palpable. Thomas Reeves had always been a background figure, barely noticed in the grand scheme of the Harrison household. But now, As he sat perched on the edge of the sofa, his eyes darting nervously between Emily and Miguel, he seemed to hold the weight of the world on his shoulders. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "It goes deeper than anything Maria revealed at the press conference. Deeper than I think even she knows." Emily leaned forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself. "The benefactor, he's not just Richard's father. He's the head of a network that's been manipulating Los Angeles and beyond for decades. Politics, business, entertainment, they have their fingers in everything." Miguel's brow furrowed. "But why? What's the endgame?" "Power," Thomas said simply. "Pure, unadulterated power. And your father, Emily, he's been their puppet for years, building Harrison Tech as a front for their operations." The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. She had known her father was involved in something sinister, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "How do you know all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've been part of it. For years I've helped facilitate their operations, passed messages, covered up their tracks. I thought I was protecting the Harrison family, but I see now that I was just another pawn in their game." The weight of Thomas's words hung heavy in the air. Emily and Miguel exchanged shocked glances, trying to process this new layer of complexity to an already tangled web. "Why are you telling us this now?" Miguel asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. Thomas pulled out a small flash drive from his pocket. "Because of this. It contains evidence, financial records, emails, recorded conversations that could bring down the entire network. I've been collecting it in secret for years, as a sort of insurance policy." He held out the flash drive, his hand trembling. "I'm giving it to you. You're the only ones I trust to do the right thing with this information." Emily stared at the innocuous-looking device, acutely aware that she was being handed a ticking time bomb. "Mr. Reeves, Thomas, you understand what you're asking us to do? This could destroy lives, topple empires." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I know, but it's time for the truth to come out, all of it." As Emily reached out to take the flash drive, a sudden commotion outside caught their attention. The sound of screeching tires and slamming car doors broke the quiet evening. Miguel rushed to the window, his face paling. "We've got company, black SUVs, men in suits. This doesn't look good." Thomas jumped to his feet, panic etched across his features. "They found me. I thought I'd lost them, but you need to go now." Emily's mind raced. "The back door. There's a path that leads down to the beach. We can lose them in the dunes." As they made for the exit, the sound of splintering wood filled the air. The front door burst open and men in dark suits poured into the house. "Run!" Thomas yelled, pushing Emily and Miguel toward the back door. "I'll hold them off." Emily hesitated, torn between fleeing and staying to help. But Miguel grabbed her hand, pulling her along. "We have to go. We're the ones with the evidence now." As they sprinted down the beach, the cool sand shifting beneath their feet, Emily clutched the flash drive tightly. Behind them, she could hear shouts and the sound of a struggle from the house. They ran until their lungs burned, finally ducking behind a large outcropping of rocks. As they caught their breath, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. "What do we do now?" Miguel asked, his voice tight with tension. Emily looked down at the flash drive in her hand, then out at the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretching before them. The sun had fully set now, leaving them in the gathering darkness. "We finish this," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We bring it all to light, no matter the cost." As they huddled together on the darkened beach, the sound of searching voices growing closer, Emily and Miguel knew that their lives had changed irrevocably. The truth they now possessed had the power to reshape their world, but it also painted targets on their backs. The real battle was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to break over the Los Angeles skyline as Emily and Miguel crouched in a dingy alley behind the Los Angeles Times building. They had spent the night on the run, using cash and burner phones to stay off the grid, their minds racing with the weight of the information they now possessed. "Are you sure about this?" Miguel asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he glanced nervously at the service entrance. Emily nodded, her grip tightening on the flash drive in her pocket. "We have to trust someone, and Javier's always been a straight shooter. If anyone can get this story out safely, it's him." As if on cue, the door creaked open, revealing Javier Ramirez, the Times' top investigative journalist. His eyes widened as he recognized the pair.
Emily? Miguel? What are you doing here? The whole city's looking for you.
We need your help, Javier, Emily said urgently. We have information that could bring down some of the most powerful people in Los Angeles, maybe even the country. Javier's journalistic instincts kicked in immediately. He ushered them inside, leading them through a maze of empty cubicles to a small, soundproofed conference room. As Emily and Miguel laid out everything they knew, from Maria's revelations to Thomas Reeves's shocking disclosures, Javier's expression grew increasingly grave. "This is big," he said finally, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Bigger than anything I've ever covered. Are you absolutely sure about this?" Emily pulled out the flash drive, placing it on the table between them. "See for yourself." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Javier called in his most trusted team members and they pored over the contents of the drive, verifying information and connecting dots that had eluded them for years. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the newsroom, a sense of nervous anticipation filled the air. They were sitting on a powder keg of information, and the fuse was lit. Suddenly, the door burst open and Richard Harrison stormed in, flanked by two imposing security guards. "Emily!" he shouted, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "What do you think you're doing?" The room froze, tension crackling like electricity. Emily stood slowly, facing her father for the first time since the press conference. "The right thing," she said quietly, "for once." Richard's eyes darted to the flash drive on the table, recognition and fear flashing across his face. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The consequences." "I understand perfectly," Emily cut him off, her voice growing stronger. "I understand that you've been a pawn in a game that's hurt countless people, that you've lied and manipulated and destroyed lives to protect a corrupt system." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "But most of all, I understand that it ends now." The air seemed to crackle with tension as father and daughter faced off. For a moment, Richard's mask slipped, and Emily caught a glimpse of the scared, trapped man beneath the powerful exterior. "Emily, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Everything I did, and it was to protect you, to give you a better life." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but her resolve didn't waver. "And look where it's gotten us, Dad. Look at the price we've all paid for your protection." She gestured to Miguel, who stood protectively at her side. "I found real love, real happiness, and you tried to destroy it. All for what? To keep your secrets? To maintain your power?" Richard's shoulders sagged, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "You don't know what they're capable of, what they'll do to all of us if this gets out." "Then help us," Miguel spoke up, his voice firm but compassionate. "Help us bring them down, for real this time." A long moment of silence stretched between them. Emily held her breath, watching the internal struggle play out on her father's face. Finally, Richard nodded, a single tear tracking down his cheek. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. With Richard's insider knowledge added to the mix, the story took on new dimensions. Names were named, connections were unveiled, and a picture of corruption and manipulation on a scale few had imagined began to emerge. As the day wore on, news began to break across the city. Arrests were made, resignations tendered, and the landscape of power in Los Angeles began to shift seismically. Through it all, Emily and Miguel clung to each other, a calm in the eye of the storm they had unleashed. As night fell once more, they found themselves back on that Malibu beach, the sound of crashing waves a soothing counterpoint to the chaos of the day. "What happens now?" Miguel asked softly, his arm wrapped around Emily's shoulders. Emily leaned into him, watching the moonlight dance on the water. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever it is, we face it together." She turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time in what felt like ages. The boy she had fallen in love with was still there, but tempered now by hardship and sacrifice. She saw in his eyes the same mix of fear and hope that she felt in her own heart. "I love you," she said simply. "Through all of this, that's the one thing I've never doubted." Miguel's smile was soft, tinged with the weight of all they'd been through. "I love you too. Always." As they stood there on the moonlit beach, the future stretched out before them, Uncertain, yes, but full of possibility. They had faced down corruption, shattered long-held secrets, and emerged stronger for it. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials and tribulations, consequences to face and wounds to heal. But as Emily looked at Miguel, his hand warm in hers, she knew that together they could face anything. The truth had come at a high price, but as the gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom, Emily knew it had been worth it. They were free now, free to love, free to live, free to build a future on a foundation of honesty and trust. As the first light of a new day began to tinge the horizon, Emily and Miguel turned away from the ocean and toward their future. Hand in hand, they walked up the beach, ready to face whatever came next. Together.
Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.